Mr. Lavrov, thank you very much for taking the time to talk. I want to ask you. Before President Putin made a decision and announced the start of a special military operation, as he calls it, he consulted with you. Is it worth it? You know, in general, a decision-making mechanism exists in every state. And in this case, the mechanism that is developed in the Russian Federation was fully activated. Did he consult with you? Once again, I explained to you that there are some things that we don't talk about publicly. There is a decision-making mechanism. This mechanism has been fully respected. I'm just asking you, because you are the Minister of Foreign Affairs of 18 years, and the invasion of a neighboring sovereign state is a foreign matter. The president probably assumed that there would be international consequences. Therefore, I assumed that he would consult with you. You know, Steve, you are a very experienced journalist. You are well acquainted with the realities in Russia and around Russia and in the post-Soviet space. In your question, there is a desire to cancel everything. Cancel culture, that was before February 24th. All 8 years, with the participation of our special services, with the participation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with the participation of the Ministry of Defense, we have promoted the need to implement the Minsk agreements, which were unanimously approved by the UN Security Council. During these 8 years, we have sought to ensure that Donetsk and Luhansk, which initially, as you remember, in 2014, in response to the neo-Nazi coup d'etat in Kyiv, declared their independence, we convinced them to sign the Minsk agreements, which guaranteed territorial integrity and sovereignty to Ukraine. When Mr. Scholz now declares that it is necessary to force Russia to make agreements with Ukraine that will respect Ukrainian territorial integrity and the sovereignty of the Ukrainian state, it seems to me that he is not of this world, but he is from somewhere out of space. Because all 8 years we have been striving to fulfill the agreements that guarantee the territorial integrity of the Ukrainian state. But the situation changed 4 months ago. The situation has not changed. We are returning to the point for which the Minsk agreements were agreed. This is the protection of the Russians in the Donbas, who were betrayed by both the French and the Germans. The British, of course, were also in the forefront. Because all our Western colleagues said that they cannot force Kyiv to comply with the Minsk agreements. If the goal is to protect the Russians in the Donbas, then why, 4 months after the start of a special military operation on the territory of the so-called LPR and DPR, more civilians died than in the whole of last year? You, too, have probably watched the reports of the German television Art and the French main channel, which recently announced that as a result of bombing by the Russian armed forces, a maternity hospital in Donetsk, a market where dozens of civilians were killed, was attacked. They stated, without any doubt, that the Russian military had done it. Just like they once, when there was a strike on the station in Kramatorsk, they said that Russia did it. Although it was proved by Western journalists that the projectile came from the territory controlled by the armed forces of Ukraine. Explain to me just one thing. Last year, 8 civilians were killed on the territory of the LPR and DPR. The year before last, 7 civilians were killed. One death is a tragedy. Absolutely. But this is not genocide, which officials in Russia often talk about. Here, please explain to me. Given these numbers, how can you say that the decision to invade Ukraine was reasonable? You know, we didn't invade Ukraine. We announced a special military operation when we no longer had any way to explain to the West that it is engaged in criminal activities, dragging Ukraine into NATO, cherishing, patronizing and nurturing an openly neo-Nazi regime in every possible way. President Zelensky said back in September last year, and you did not inform your viewers about this. He said that if someone feels like a Russian person in Ukraine, then let him leave for Russia. He said it publicly. When a CNN correspondent told him that the Azov regiment was included in some Western countries, both in the United States at one time and in Japan, on the list of extremist, terrorist organizations, Zelensky shrugged his shoulders and said that they have many such battalions and regiments. They are what they are. Let's look at the consequences. 4 months have passed. As a result, thousands of civilians died. More than 14 million Ukrainian residents were forced to leave their homes. There are significant losses of Russian troops. There are many sanctions against Russia. And do you still think that this is the right decision? I tell you again that we had no other choice. We have explained this over and over, 1,000 times. Now, with your Western weapons, the Ukrainian regime is attacking civilians, attacking cities, just like they did in 2014. When the Putschists came to power, when they bombed the center of Lugansk from aircraft, when they burned 50 people in Odessa. Does anyone remember this now? If you had not attacked, there would have been no weapons supplies from the West. No, we didn't attack anyone. They attacked Russians in Ukraine. Imagine that you are an Englishman. Are you English or Scottish? I gave you numbers. 8 dead last year, or 7. I explained to you that the Ukrainian regime is bombing its own population, and you sell weapons to it so that it continues to do this. And about the genocide, are you an Englishman? Yes, I am Englishman. Imagine if in Ireland, not in Northern Ireland, but in the Republic of Ireland, English was banned. How would the British feel? They certainly wouldn't have invaded Ireland. No, wait. Wouldn't that humiliate you? The Russian language is banned in Ukraine. Try on the street in Kyjevě, when young people of a certain appearance are walking there, to speak Russian. Try it. Why do you think NATO is a threat? Why is it often said in Russia that there were 5 waves of NATO expansion? You know, I think that NATO is a threat because we have been close friends with our friends in Serbia for a very long time, for example. They told us what NATO is. In Afghanistan, the Afghans with whom we have relations, from almost all ethnic groups, they also tell us what NATO is and how it bombed wedding ceremonies. Just because the military of the alliance thought, why are some people gathered together? We need to bomb them just in case. I will explain to you why NATO is a threat. Talk to the citizens of Iraq, for example, the citizens of Libya, whose country has been razed to the ground by NATO. After that, NATO declares itself to be still a defensive alliance. And we are told, don't worry, Ukraine's accession to NATO, we were told, would not pose a threat to the Russian Federation. With all due respect to our colleagues from the North Atlantic Alliance, Russia has the right to decide for itself what is a threat to its security and what is not. Don't you think so? Look, before the annexation of Crimea in 2014, there were no NATO troops in Eastern Europe. I'll tell you more, and there was no annexation of Crimea. Then, as a result of the annexation of Crimea in 2016, 4,500 military personnel appeared there. Then, this year, after February 24, there were 40,000 of them. This is the result of Russia's actions. Listen, Steve, you're a smart person. These are facts, of course. Noah, I will give you other facts. All your analytics is based on the same cancel culture. You cancel everything that preceded the event that you decide to call either an invasion or an annexation. What happened on February 21, 2014 in Ukraine? This is what we call a coup. What do you call it? I ask you first. What do you call it? I have already said that we call this a coup d'état that took place the morning after France, Poland, and Germany put their signatures on the agreement between the then president and the leaders of the opposition. The next morning, the leaders of the opposition did not give a damn about Germany, France, and Poland, and Germany, France, and Poland wiped themselves off. Speaking in Russian, we called it coup d'état. And what did you call it? The events of 8 years ago give you the right to do what you do? This is not about law. I want to hear from you, to be honest. This is what we call a coup d'état. What is it called in England? This is me interviewing you. Oh sure. But I want to understand your logic. Because in order for me to answer you clearly, you must clearly explain to me what you are talking about. I want to understand your logic. You say NATO is a threat. Look, now you are saying that there are too many NATO near the borders with Russia. And now, as a result of Russia's actions, there is even more NATO. Finland and Sweden enter into an alliance. Finland and Sweden have long become subordinate to the Anglo-Saxons as part of the rapprochement between the European Union and NATO. The European Union is losing its significance. This is a failure of Russian diplomacy. In what sense? That Sweden and Finland become members of NATO. Sweden and Finland exercise their sovereign right and act as their government sees fit. They also do not take into account the opinion of the people, just as they did not take into account the opinion of many other peoples, solving the tasks that NATO sets for itself. That is, this is not a threat to Russia. We'll see how it ends. We have said more than once that when, and if Sweden and Finland join NATO, we will see what will actually happen on Earth. Will arms be supplied there? Will new contingents be deployed there? At the same time, I assure you that no one will listen to the Europeans. No one will listen to either Finland or Sweden. They are now telling us that they will not have any foreign armed forces and military bases. And Mr. Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense of the United States, said that the United States plans to increase its military presence in Europe. That they haven't decided yet if it's going to be permanent, rotating, or constantly rotating. He did not say at all that it would be necessary to consult with the European allies. He does not want to listen to these European allies. He decided so. He announced that they would decide it in Washington. Russia says they are fighting Nazis in Ukraine, right? No, they don't fight the Nazis in Ukraine. Nazism flourishes in Ukraine. Then listen to what the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has to say. She spoke in May, including following the results of the monitoring mission. And she said that in the village of Yuhodnoye in the Chernihiv region, the Russian military held 360 people for 28 days, including 74 children and 5 people with disabilities in the basement of a school, without a toilet and without water. 10 elderly people died. Is this the fight against Nazism? You know, unfortunately, international officials, including the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and, to my great regret, the UN Secretary General and many other representatives of the United Nations, are subject to pressure from the West. And very often they act as the mouthpiece of the fake news that the West is spreading. That is, it turns out that Russia is again white and fluffy? No, Russia is not white and fluffy. Russia is what it is. We are not ashamed to show ourselves as we are. Can I still ask you, so that I understand the policy of your media about the tragedy in Bucha, about the staging in Bucha? Did you report? You probably said that Russia did it. I'm right? And the fact that the Guardian newspaper, published in London, later received the results of a preliminary forensic examination, which showed that the vast majority of those people whose corpses were shown on all television channels in the world were injured by artillery shells. What is the purpose of your question? We have little time. Yes, we don't have much time. But you don't want to explain to me why you constantly, to put it mildly, tell lies? I ask you a question. How did the BBC cover the events in Bucha? I have not been to Bucha. I am in Russia, so I am asking about Russia's position. The goal of the operation, as the president of Russia then stated, is regime change. Is not it? It's not about regime change. The purpose of the operation is to protect the rights of the Russians, who for 8 years were grossly ignored, not only by the Kiev regime, but also by the entire West and the civilized community, which refused to comply with the Minsk agreements. If you did not want to ensure the rights of the Russians in the Donbas by implementing the Security Council resolution by Kiev, then we will ensure the rights of the Russians ourselves. And we do it. On February 25, Putin addressed the Ukrainian soldiers and told them to take power into their own hands, since it would be easier for Russia to negotiate with them than with the gang of drug addicts and neo-Nazis that settled in Kiev. This sounds like a direct call for a military mutiny. No, this sounds like a direct call to do your military duty and not to serve the Nazis, who cancel everything that their regime does not like, including Russian education, Russian culture, Russian media. The BBC has not been cancelled in Ukraine because you are not telling the truth about what has been going on there for 8 years. I ask you, did you or any of your colleagues from the BBC travel to Donbas for 8 years when Kiev soldiers bombed civilians there? You know, for 6 years our team has repeatedly applied to the leadership of the DPR and LPR for permission to come and see what is happening. Every time we got rejected. I think that, if there really was a genocide going on there, they would be interested in us coming and seeing. But no. Why weren't we allowed? I don't know why they didn't let you in. But our journalists worked there around the clock and showed the results of the bombing of the Kiev battalions. You would go to the Ukrainian side, to the line of contact. There they have no such destruction and close. I want to ask you. Your president recently praised Peter the Great very much for allegedly returning the primordially Russian territories, and even added that it also fell to our lot to return and strengthen. I want to ask you, how many more territories and what territories are you going to return? Well, first of all, the president has said everything. I have nothing to add here. And secondly, I will tell you again. You are trying to forget everything that preceded that event. I'm telling you. You deny. You cancel. You don't want to hear about what preceded February 24. What preceded the vote in Crimea. You are not satisfied that we are very patient. But when patience bursts, we react to rudeness and humiliation of the Russian people, as happened with the coup d'etat in February 2014. When people came to power who said that they were cancelling the regional status of the Russian language. 1 second. That they are driving the Russians out of the Crimea. They sent armed people there. What was the BBC reporting about it then? Nothing at all. You said that this is a normal democratic process, that's all. Can you categorically state that there will be no more special operations and Russian invasions of other territories neighboring Russia? You know, we believed in the word for a very long time. Your brother soldiers, compatriots, together with other members of the North Atlantic Alliance, solemnly proclaimed the principle of the indivisibility of security, when no one has the right to strengthen his security at the expense of the security of others. And when we said that the five-fold expansion of NATO violates our security, you simply ignored us. Now French President Macron has said that they should talk to Russia, that they should not humiliate the Russians. Do you know who answered him? Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, some kind of Mr. Lipavsky. He said that Macron did not understand anything, implying that the Russians should be humiliated. What do you think about it? I want to ask you about the Britons who were recently sentenced to death. To do this, you must interview in the Donetsk People's Republic, since Russia is the only country that recognizes the DPR. No, not the only one, several other countries have recognized them. I think the DPR has a strong influence in Russia. We are friends, we are allies. Therefore, in the eyes of the West, Russia is responsible for the fate of these people. No, listen, I'm not interested in the eyes of the West at all. I am only interested in international law. Under international law, mercenaries are not combatants. Therefore, what is in your eyes? Frankly, does not matter. They are not mercenaries, they served in the Ukrainian armed forces. This must be determined by the court. Do you think there is an independent court there? I am convinced that there is an independent court. Do you think you have an independent judiciary? How did you judge Litvinenko? Or rather, how, after Litvinenko's death, your independent court took and declared a public process, that is, classified the case. You did the same with the Skripals. This is your law. Did the British government approach you about the fate of these guys? I didn't hear them contact us. They are used to doing everything in public. They began to declare that they were concerned about the fate of their subjects. I don't know if they contacted us or not. They must apply to the Donetsk People's Republic. What can you say about relations with Great Britain now? To say that they are bad is, of course, an understatement. You know, in my opinion, there is no room for maneuver in these relations. Because both Johnson and Truss publicly declare that they must defeat Russia, that they must bring Russia to its knees. Come on, put it on. How does Moscow see the Great Britain now? This is a country that is trying once again to sacrifice the interests of its people to the ambitions of politicians who think only about the next elections and nothing else. You criticize the countries that supply weapons to Kyjev. Who is more to blame for this? Countries that supply weapons to Ukraine, which defends its lands, or a country that attacked it? How does she protect her lands when she bombs her citizens? I remind you once again that Zelensky said in September that whoever wants to think in Russian, who considers himself Russian, let him go to Russia. Why don't you talk about it? Why do you forget about previous events? Now, when they are bombing their own cities, towns, markets, maternity hospitals, all this is allegedly in order. You ask why Russia is at war in response to what we show. If in Britain they do not show the consequences of the bombing of Donetsk, Kramatorsk and other settlements, then here you are probably watching this. Do you report anything about this? You said that you are protecting the Donbas and the people in the Donbas. I told you that 20 times more people died. And I told you that these people are being killed by Ukrainian neo-Nazis. I ask you, do you show the results of the bombing of settlements by the armed forces of Ukraine? Or do you not show it in your reports? You don't show it? I'm right? Therefore, you now need to extract from me some words of regret about what is happening in order to send your report to London. And use my words to confirm the false version of what is happening in Ukraine that you constantly broadcast. In this you are wrong. No, I ask you, do you show it? You, being in Moscow, please excuse me. You cannot but see what the journalists show in the Donbas. What is happening as a result of the bombing of peaceful settlements and civilians. Are you reporting it or not? I want to ask you, our time is almost up. So you don't report it. I have been in Russia for almost 30 years. I have traveled this country. In the villages and cities where I have visited, you know what phrase I hear most often? It is if only there was no war. It is if only there was no war. I understand that your country has suffered terribly. Therefore, it does not fit into my head that your country unleashed a war in Ukraine and started a war in Europe. I don't understand why this was necessary. To destroy Ukraine and the future of your country? I heard you. Do you fit into your head the political course that Kyiv has been pursuing for the past 10 years to abolish everything Russian? Do you have it in your head? Do you think that the phrase "if only there was no war" means the possibility of humiliating Russians, Russia? As the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic says about this, answering Macron, who calls not to humiliate the Russians. For some reason no one talks about it. You have captured what you need for your line, for the logic of your broadcasts. If only there was no war, this phrase is deeply rooted in the Russian people. But pride is also rooted in the Russian people. What we call national pride, self-esteem, which they are trying to deprive all Russians in Ukraine with your support, that's all. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Steve.